You won't believe what happens when a seemingly perfect neighborhood enforcer takes things a step too far. After one simple mistake, Karen's life gets turned upside down. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. It was a quiet afternoon in the Oak Ridge Estates neighborhood, a pristine community ruled with an iron fist by the local Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen Thompson, self-proclaimed enforcer of neighborhood order and proud HOA board member, was doing her usual afternoon routine, peering out her window with a cup of tea in hand, scrutinizing every car, lawn, and trash can in sight. She considered herself the first and last line of defense against anything she deemed a violation of the HOA's strict rules. Her latest target? A sleek, black SUV parked a few houses down. It had been there for a few days, and despite its spotless condition, she was convinced it didn't belong. It had tinted windows, an out-of-state license plate, and an aura of mystery that Karen simply could not tolerate. The vehicle had no HOA parking permit, and that alone was reason enough for her to take action. She had already reported it on the neighborhood Facebook page, complaining about how outsiders were treating their pristine community like a public parking lot. No one responded with the level of outrage she expected, so she decided to handle things herself. With the determination of a woman on a mission, Karen stormed out of her house and marched toward the SUV, phone in hand. She circled it, snapping photos from every angle like a detective collecting evidence. Her years of policing trash bins and Christmas decorations had honed her ability to spot a problem, and this was a problem she was ready to eliminate. She dialed the number for her go-to towing company. She had them save their contacts under HOA enforcement. When the dispatcher answered, she didn't waste a second. "Hi, this is Karen Thompson, HOA board member of Oak Ridge Estates. I have an abandoned vehicle taking up space on our street. No permit, hasn't moved in days, definitely doesn't belong. Can you send a tow truck immediately?" The dispatcher, already familiar with Karen's frequent calls, assured her a truck would be there within the hour. That was all Karen needed to hear. She smirked, arms crossed, feeling victorious. This was what she lived for, restoring order, one violation at a time. What she didn't know was that this was no ordinary SUV. It belonged to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and was an active surveillance vehicle positioned for a high-stakes investigation. Inside the vehicle was a setup worth tens of thousands of dollars, high-powered cameras, encrypted communication systems, and laptops transmitting real-time data to an off-site command center. The agents using it had been taking shifts, monitoring a house just a few doors down. Their target? A suspected money launderer with ties to an international criminal organization. The investigation had been in motion for months, with this particular phase being one of the most crucial. At that moment, the two FBI agents assigned to the vehicle were out grabbing coffee, having stepped away only briefly. The surveillance setup had been left running, quietly doing its job. By the time one of the agents returned, he was met with a sight that sent his heart plummeting. The SUV was gone. He froze for half a second before his instincts kicked in. Pulling out his radio, he called his partner. "Surveillance 1 is missing. I repeat, the SUV is gone." Within seconds, the situation escalated. Backup agents were alerted, supervisors were notified, and an emergency response was underway. Losing an FBI surveillance vehicle wasn't just a logistical nightmare. It was a security crisis. The equipment inside was classified, and in the wrong hands, it could compromise not only their investigation, but other ongoing federal operations. As the FBI scrambled, Karen was basking in self-satisfaction. She had returned to her house, logged onto the HOA social media page, and typed up a triumphant post. "Another victory for the HOA. That suspicious black SUV that's been lurking around? Gone. I took care of it. We don't tolerate rule breakers in this neighborhood. Hashtag clean streets, hashtag HOA justice." She sat back in her chair, sipping her tea, waiting for the flood of praise that would surely follow. Meanwhile, at the impound lot, the unsuspecting tow truck driver finished parking the SUV in its assigned spot. He had no idea he had just towed a federal asset. The vehicle was now locked behind a chain-link fence, sitting among junk cars and repossessed vehicles, completely unaware that an elite law enforcement agency was about to come looking for it. The FBI worked fast. Within minutes, they traced the tow truck's GPS records and found out which company had hauled their vehicle away. One phone call later, the dispatcher at the towing company was sweating. "You did what?" the voice on the other end of the line demanded. We towed an illegally parked SUV from Oak Ridge Estates," the dispatcher stammered. "That was not an illegally parked vehicle," the agent growled. "That was an FBI surveillance car. You need to tell me exactly where it is. Right now." The dispatcher's stomach dropped. It's in our lot. Do not touch that car." The agent hung up, and within minutes, black SUVs with government plates were speeding toward the impound lot. Back in Oak Ridge Estates, Karen was still scrolling through the comments under her post. A few people had liked it. A few had commented, "Good job." But one reply made her pause. Karen, are you sure that was just some random SUV?" Karen scoffed. Of course she was sure. Who else would park an unmarked vehicle in a neighborhood like this? But just as she was about to respond, a sudden knock at her door made her jump. She wasn't expecting visitors. Frowning, she set her phone down and walked to the door. When she opened it, she was met with two men in dark suits, flashing badges in her face. "Mrs. Thompson?" "Yes," she said hesitantly. "We need to have a conversation about the vehicle you had towed today." Her stomach dropped. Karen stood frozen in her doorway, staring at the two men in dark suits. Their FBI badges gleamed under the porch light, and their expressions were anything but friendly. For the first time in her long history of policing her neighbors, she felt something unfamiliar creeping up her spine. Fear. "Mrs. Thompson, may we come in?" one of the agents asked, though it was phrased more as a statement than a question. Karen swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had never been on the receiving end of an official visit like this. Normally, she was the one calling the authorities, reporting some minor infraction, ensuring the neighborhood remained pristine. Now, the authorities were standing on her doorstep, looking at her like she was the problem. What is this about?" she stammered, trying to maintain her usual air of control. The lead agent, a tall man with a sharp jawline, didn't blink. "It's about the vehicle you had towed today." Karen crossed her arms, tried to regain some footing. "Well, it was parked illegally. No HOA permit. I have every right." "You had every right to report a suspected violation," the agent interrupted, his tone sharp. "You did not, however, have the right to interfere with a federal investigation." Karen's face paled. A federal what? The second agent, shorter and stockier, pulled out his phone and swiped to a picture of the black SUV. "Does this look familiar?" Karen's throat went dry. She knew exactly what they were referring to, but she was too stubborn to admit fault. "That was an abandoned vehicle," she said weakly. "That was an FBI surveillance vehicle," the taller agent corrected. "It was part of an active operation targeting a suspect in your neighborhood. When you had it towed, you didn't just move a car. You compromised months of investigative work." Karen's hands were clammy now. I didn't know. Did you even try to find out?" the shorter agent pressed. "Did you run the plates? Contact local law enforcement? Speak to anyone before you made the call?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She had done none of those things. In her mind, the SUV had simply been another violation, another stain on the uniformity of her beloved community. She had acted swiftly, efficiently, just as she always did. Except this time, she had stepped on the toes of the federal government. "Where's the vehicle now?" the tall agent asked. Karen fidgeted. "The tow company." I can get you their information." "We already have it," the agent said coolly. "A team is recovering the vehicle as we speak." Karen exhaled in relief, thinking that meant she was off the hook. But the agent wasn't done. "You don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation, Mrs. Thompson," he continued. "This isn't just about towing a car. That SUV contained sensitive surveillance equipment, classified technology that should never have fallen into civilian hands." Karen's stomach churned. "I didn't know," she repeated, her voice smaller now. The agent's gaze didn't soften. "That's exactly the problem. You acted without knowledge, without considering the consequences. And because of that, you may have put our investigation at risk." Karen's mind reeled. She wasn't used to being the one in trouble. She had built her reputation on enforcing rules, making sure everyone else followed the guidelines. Now, she was the one being scolded like a reckless teenager. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was already buzzing with rumors. A few residents had seen the black SUVs pull into Karen's driveway. Someone had even taken a picture and posted it in the HOA Facebook group with a caption, "Looks like Karen finally picked a fight with the wrong people." Karen, oblivious to the online chatter, was still grappling with the reality of her situation. What happens now?" she asked hesitantly. "For now," the agent exhaled. "Stay put. Don't delete anything. Texts, emails, call logs. If we need further information, we'll be back." Karen nodded quickly, her mind racing. The agents turned to leave, but before they stepped off her porch, the shorter one gave her a pointed look. "Next time, Mrs. Thompson, think before you act." The door closed behind them, leaving Karen standing in her foyer, heart pounding. She had made a mistake, a massive, potentially life-altering mistake. Karen's mind spiraled as she sat down at her kitchen table, hands trembling. She reached for her phone to check the HOA Facebook group, only to be met with a flood of notifications. Residents were laughing at her expense, some expressing concern, while others reveled in the irony of the self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer now being the subject of a federal inquiry. A new post caught her eye. "I hope Karen didn't just get herself a one-way ticket to jail." The comments below range from sarcastic jabs to genuine speculation about the legal trouble she might be in. Her stomach turned. Would she really be arrested for this? Would they actually press charges? What if the FBI was just testing her, seeing if she'd confessed to tampering with their vehicle? She hadn't touched it, but would they believe her? Her mind darted to her husband, out of town on a business trip, and their two grown children who would undoubtedly be mortified if their mother ended up in the news. What would she even tell them? A loud knock startled her. She hesitated before answering, her heart nearly stopping when she saw a man from the tow company standing on her porch. He was holding a clipboard and didn't look pleased. "You Mrs. Thompson?" She nodded. "You're the one who called about the black SUV?" Yes, she said hesitantly. "Well, I don't know what you got yourself into, lady, but the feds weren't happy. They stormed our lot, took the vehicle, and left us with a whole mess of paperwork. You're lucky they didn't arrest my boss." Karen swallowed hard. I didn't know it was." "Yeah, well, next time, maybe don't go around towing things you don't understand." He shoved the clipboard at her. "Sign this. We're billing you for the tow and storage fees." Karen's hands shook as she scribbled her name. As the man walked away, she realized something chilling. She had spent years enforcing rules, believing she was always in the right. But in the eyes of the FBI, she was just another civilian who had overstepped her bounds. And she had never felt more powerless in her life. And for the first time in her life, she had no idea how to fix it. The next morning, Karen awoke to find her phone buzzing with endless notifications. She had hoped for some peace, but instead, the storm she had unleashed the previous day was far from over. Her first instinct was to check the HOA Facebook group, the place where neighborhood drama often unfolded. What she saw made her stomach churn. The group had erupted overnight, and there were dozens of comments, many mocking her, others outright furious. Some neighbors expressed concern that her meddling had jeopardized an important FBI operation, while others simply enjoyed the spectacle of her downfall. A fresh post stood out among the rest. Did Karen just endanger the whole neighborhood? FBI surveillance isn't for fun, lady. The replies varied. Some were sarcastic jabs. Others were downright accusatory. I wouldn't be surprised if she gets arrested. All that rule enforcing, and she didn't even check the plates? LOL. But she tries to find the FBI next. Karen's hands shook as she scrolled through the posts, her mind unable to process the magnitude of her situation. Her once ironclad reputation as the neighborhood's enforcer was crumbling fast. Neighbors who had once respected, or at least feared, her authority were now turning on her. They were not just questioning her actions, they were laughing at her expense. The woman who had spent years ensuring compliance with HOA rules, pushing for perfection in every corner of the neighborhood, was now a cautionary tale of what happens when someone oversteps their bounds. Karen was horrified but she couldn't afford to sit in her kitchen feeling sorry for herself. The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through her panic. With dread building in her chest, she opened the door to see Mrs. Delgado, the HOA president, standing with a thin-lipped frown. Karen could already sense the coldness in her expression. "We need to talk," Mrs. Delgado said curtly, her tone businesslike and unyielding. Karen hesitated before stepping aside to let her in. She could feel the weight of the conversation pressing down on her, but she still hoped, deep down, that perhaps the HOA would find a way to excuse her actions. After all, she had only been trying to uphold the rules. But the reality was that Karen knew better than to think this was going to be an easy conversation. They sat stiffly in the living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them before Mrs. Delgado spoke again. "You know why I'm here," she began. Her voice, though calm, was laden with authority. "The board has received multiple complaints about your behavior. Your actions disrupted a federal investigation, embarrassed the HOA, and frankly, put us in an awkward position. We're getting calls from residents, from people in the community who are wondering what the heck you were thinking." Karen's jaw tightened. This was it. She had spent years building her reputation as the ultimate enforcer of rules in the neighborhood, someone who could be relied upon to keep things in order. But now it was all slipping away. "I was enforcing the rules," Karen said, her voice rising slightly, trying to defend herself. "It was an illegally parked vehicle. I have the right to report violations." "At what cost?" Mrs. Delgado interrupted, her voice sharp. "The FBI, Karen. This isn't about unkempt lawns or improper parking anymore. The whole neighborhood is in an uproar, and now everyone is talking about you, and not in a good way. People are saying you overstepped in a way that could have put them at risk." Karen's stomach twisted. She had never anticipated such a response. The weight of what she had done, what she had not fully understood, was now dawning on her. She thought back to the FBI agent's words, "You may have put our investigation at risk." Her mind reeled at the thought that her little power play over a parking violation could have consequences that reached far beyond her neighborhood. "So what happens now?" Karen asked, her voice suddenly small, vulnerable. Mrs. Delgado sighed, clearly reluctant but resolute. "We're voting to remove you from the HOA board. You've embarrassed the HOA, and we can't afford to have someone in a position of power who doesn't understand the seriousness of the rules, especially when it involves something as important as the federal government." Karen's breath caught in her throat. "You can't." "We can," Mrs. Delgado said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And we are. The decision will be made by the end of the day. You're going to be removed from the board, and your position as the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood will be over." The words hit Karen like a ton of bricks. She had never imagined such a thing could happen. She had always been the one who held the power in the neighborhood, the one who enforced every little rule, the one who could make or break a person's standing based on whether they kept their lawn neat or parked within the lines. Now all that authority was slipping through her fingers. She had spent years building this empire of control, but in an instant, it was all crumbling. The conversation ended soon after, with Karen sitting numbly in her chair as Mrs. Delgado left. Her mind was spinning, unable to process the totality of the situation. She was no longer the feared enforcer. She was a laughingstock. Her neighbors were not just mocking her. They were discussing her as if she were the punchline of some cruel joke. That evening, Karen avoided social media. She couldn't bear to look at the comments, the mocking posts, the ridicule that continued to pour in from every direction. The FBI had already collected their surveillance vehicle, and while they hadn't arrested her, she knew she wasn't out of the woods yet. Her once tightly controlled world had been shaken, and the reputation she had spent so long building was now in tatters. It wasn't just the neighborhood that was talking. Karen's phone rang off the hook with calls from friends and acquaintances, some of whom were sympathetic, but most simply wanted to know if the rumors were true. Did she really tow an FBI surveillance vehicle? Was she going to get arrested? As the evening dragged on, Karen sat in the dim light of her living room, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but feel like she had lost everything. The power she had wielded with such certainty, The respect she had demanded from everyone around her had all vanished. People who had once nodded in agreement when she spoke now looked at her with disbelief, as though questioning everything they had ever known about her. She realized something terrifying in that moment. She had always lived by the rules. She believed that following the rules meant you were safe, that it meant you were in control. But the real world was more complicated than HOA regulations. There were larger forces at play, and this time, she had learned that lesson the hard way. She had tried to control something far beyond her understanding, and now she had paid the price for it. For the first time in her life, Karen didn't know how to fix it. There were no more rules to enforce, no more regulations to follow. She had overstepped in a way that couldn't be undone, and no amount of apologies would restore her reputation. The consequences of her actions were far greater than she could have ever imagined, and all she had left was the wreckage of what she had once thought was unshakable.